Get down. Face on the pavement. Now. The order came from behind a flashlight beam so close it felt like heat. The man in the gray sweatshirt did not flinch. He was 51 years old, standing at the end of his own driveway on Copperstone Lane in Havermill, Virginia, with the last of his morning fog still curling out of his mouth in the 6 a.m. cold. His hands went open at his sides, palms forward, fingers spread, deliberate, the kind of open hands a person shows when they have practiced showing them. I said face down. The patrolman's boots came around the cruiser's headlight. Tall man, broad, a duty belt that creaked when he shifted his weight. He was maybe 30, maybe younger. His name tape read Boyce. His body camera blinked a small green light near his collar, then blinked once and did not blink again. Officer, my identification is in my mailbox. This is my property. The address is 174 Copperstone Lane. I did not ask for a speech. I asked for your face on the ground. The dispatcher's voice bled through the cruiser's open door in a tinny loop, replaying the call for the responding unit. The words came out slow and careful, the way a person reads something they have written down first. Black male, gray sweatshirt, walking on Copperstone, doesn't belong here. He's been circling the block. The man in the gray sweatshirt heard every word. He did not move. He looked past the flashlight, at the small green light on the patrolman's collar that had stopped blinking, and he waited. Down, on your knees, hands behind your head. I am not going to ask again. He went down, slow, right knee first, then left, hands laced at the base of his skull the way a person laces them when they have been trained where the muscles hurt least. Gravel bit through his sweatpants. Somewhere across the street, a curtain moved in a window, then moved back. His phone, tucked into the small zipper pocket at his hip, began to buzz. It buzzed once, then twice, then a third time, long, insistent, the pattern of a call that was not going to stop being placed. The cuffs came out, metal on nylon. The click was small and precise, and then it came a second time, and there was a silence in the cold air that felt engineered. He kept his palms open. 9 months earlier, he had signed the closing papers on a modest colonial at the end of Copperstone Lane. 3 bedrooms, a back porch that faced a hayfield, a mailbox at the road with brass numbers his realtor said were the original brass from when the house was built in 1961. The realtor had been a soft-spoken woman named Priscilla, who had shaken his hand twice and asked no questions about his work. He liked her for that. His name was Cassian Alder. He was not from Havermill. He was from the part of northern Virginia where the federal buildings stood shoulder to shoulder and the parking lots emptied out at 6 p.m. and filled again by 7 the next morning. He had bought the house because it was 48 miles from the office, and because at 48 miles the noise stopped and the sky got wider, and because a man who spent his days reading briefings about the worst things people did to each other needed a porch that faced a hayfield. He was black. He was tall, unhurried, gray at the temples. He wore reading glasses when he read and did not wear them when he walked. He ran the same 3-mile loop every morning at 6 a.m., out the driveway, right on Copperstone, right on Millbank, left on the old logging road and back. He folded his running gloves the same way every morning before he tucked them into the small hall table drawer, thumb over palm, fingers over thumb, a small, tight square. He had done it that way for 29 years. It was not a superstition. It was just how his hands knew. The neighborhood was polite. That was the word the realtor had used. Polite. Cassian understood the word before he unpacked the first box. The first notice arrived in his mailbox 6 days after he moved in. It was printed on cream-colored cardstock with a border of stylized ivy. It read in a font that had been chosen by a committee that his mailbox flag holder was not in compliance with the Copperstone Homeowners Association Architectural Review Standards, Section 4, Subsection C. It was signed
C. Fraser, chair. The flag holder had come with the house. It had been there for 63 years. He replaced it, quietly. He did not write back. The second notice arrived 3 weeks later. His porch light was too warm in color temperature. The community standard was 3,500 Kelvin. His was 2,700. He changed the bulb. The third notice was about the shade of gray his front door was painted. It was not the approved gray. It was, according to the notice, drifting toward beige. He read the notice twice at his kitchen counter, drinking coffee, and then he set it down and looked out the window at his front door and said nothing at all. Camellia Fraser lived across the street. She was in her mid-60s, thin, with a haircut that cost more than the notices she wrote. She had lived on Copperstone Lane for 22 years, and she had been the chair of the Architectural Review Committee for 11 of them, and she had, over the course of Cassian's first 2 months in the house, walked her small white dog past his front porch every morning at 7:15 a.m. without once meeting his eyes. The first time she spoke to him, she was standing at his fence line with a paper cup of coffee. It was a Tuesday. She smiled at him. The small, careful smile of a woman who has decided in advance how a conversation will end. "I hope you're settling in." "I am, thank you." "Are you renting?" He looked at her for a long moment. He was standing on his own porch. His name was on the mailbox. His car was in the driveway. "No, ma'am. I bought the house in April." "Oh, how lovely. We have so many rentals now, investors, you know. It's changed the character." "I understand. You must have a very interesting job." "I work in Washington." "Oh." Her eyes moved down him once and back up. "How nice."
He had not asked what he did. She had asked, in the way people like Camellia Fraser asked, whether the answer was going to embarrass her. He watched her decide it might. And he watched her decide not to press, and he watched her walk her small white dog back across the street to her own porch and pour her coffee into the flower bed because it had gone cold. That was the moment he understood what kind of neighborhood he had bought into. Not a hostile one, a polite one. There was a difference, and the difference was measured in cream-colored cardstock and questions that were not questions. He did not tell his wife. His wife lived in the Georgetown house they had shared for 18 years, and she came out to Havermill on the weekends when her caseload permitted. And Cassian did not want her caseload to permit less. He handled Copperstone Lane the way he handled every other situation in his life that required patience and no visible reaction. He cataloged. He waited. He folded his gloves at the end of every run and put them in the drawer. If this pacing is landing for you so far, tap the like button. It tells the algorithm to keep pushing stories like this one forward. He ran 3 miles every morning. 6 a.m., out the door, right on Copperstone. He ran on the shoulder because there was no sidewalk. He waved at Mr. Halstead, the retired postal carrier at number 162, who was always up early with his coffee, and Mr. Halstead waved back every single morning. And Cassian counted that as the neighborhood's honest majority. It was on a Saturday morning in the middle of his 9th month on Copperstone Lane that the honest majority did not save him. The dispatcher's log later showed the call had come in at 5:58 a.m. A woman's voice, controlled, well-modulated, reading what sounded like notes she had written down in advance. "I'd like to report a suspicious person. He's walking on Copperstone Lane, black male, gray sweatshirt. He's been circling the block. He doesn't belong here." "Ma'am, do you know this person?" "I do not." "Has he approached you or made any threats?" "He is walking on the street at 6 in the morning in this neighborhood. I am telling you what I see." "Understood. I'll send a unit." The unit was Officer Blaine Boyce, 6-year Havermill patrolman, currently under quarterly review by his field training supervisor for a pattern of complaints his chief had, per procedure, characterized as unfounded in all previous instances.
Boyce had been 3 blocks away, parked behind the Baptist church at the end of Millbank, drinking coffee and running plates on cars parked overnight. He put the coffee in the cup holder, he turned the engine over, and he rolled onto Copperstone at 52 miles an hour in a 35 zone, with his lights on but no siren, and he saw the man in the gray sweatshirt standing at the end of the driveway at number 174, and he made his decision before he braked. Cassian saw the cruiser come around the bend. He was standing at his own mailbox, his own brass numbers over his shoulder, having just come to the end of his run. He was not out of breath. He was pulling his gloves off, thumb over palm, when the cruiser stopped diagonally across the driveway entrance, blocking his own gate. The door opened, the boots came down. "Sir, I need to see your identification." "My identification is inside the house. This is my house. My address is 174 Copperstone Lane, which is stenciled on the mailbox to my left." "You match the description of a suspicious person in this area." "The description of a black man in a gray sweatshirt. I heard the call on your radio." The patrolman's jaw tightened. "You heard nothing." "Officer, the posted sign on my gate reads no trespassing, VA code 18.2-119. I am on my side of that sign. You are on the wrong side of it. I would ask, per procedure, that you step back and allow me to walk up to my front door." "You are not going anywhere until I confirm your identity." "I understand. Then I would ask you to open my mailbox, which is legally accessible to a peace officer on a welfare check, and remove the small manila envelope taped to the inside of the lid. It contains a photocopy of my driver's license. It has been there since April, for exactly this situation." The patrolman did not move. His eyes did not leave Cassian's face.
"You had a photocopy of your license taped inside your mailbox." "I did." "Why would a person do that?" "Because I am 51 years old, officer, and I have lived in this country every one of those years." Something passed behind the patrolman's eyes. It was not shame, it was closer to insult. He stepped forward. He did not open the mailbox. "Turn around, hands on the vehicle. I have not been asked to leave my own property. There is no probable cause for a Terry stop under the standard in Virginia v. Moore. I would ask you to reconsider. Per procedure." Cassian's chin lifted, very slightly. It was the second time he had used the phrase per procedure in the exchange. The first time the officer had not noticed. The second time, a voice came through the cruiser's open radio. Not the dispatcher, a different voice, older, calmer. "Boyce, this is Arwood. Slow it down. What's your visual?" The patrolman did not answer his own field training officer. He stepped forward instead, and he grabbed Cassian's wrist, and he turned him hard against the mailbox post. Cassian did not resist. He kept his hands open. He kept his voice at the same low, unhurried pitch. "Officer Boyce, your body camera stopped recording 40 seconds ago. Your cruiser's dash cam is angled away from us. You are alone with me on private property with no active recording. Whatever you are about to do next, I would ask you to reconsider that also." The patrolman went very still. "How do you know my name?" "It is on your name tape. Second line, block letters, standard issue duty uniform." "How do you know my body camera stopped?" "Because the small green light on your collar stopped blinking 1 minute and 12 seconds ago, and it has not started again." The patrolman looked down at his own collar for the first time in the entire encounter. The light was indeed dark. Boyce's face went a color that was not quite red. He pulled the cuffs from his belt. Metal on nylon. If you're watching this and something in it is landing on your chest, hit subscribe. This channel puts out one of these every week.
He ran 3 miles every morning. 6 a.m., out the door, right on Copperstone. He ran on the shoulder because there was no sidewalk. He waved at Mr. Halstead, the retired postal carrier at number 162, who was always up early with his coffee.
and Mr. Halstead waved back every single morning, and Cassian counted that as the neighborhood's honest majority. It was on a Saturday morning in the middle of his 9th month on Copperstone Lane that the honest majority did not save him. The dispatcher's log later showed the call had come in at 5:58 a.m. A woman's voice, controlled, well-modulated, reading what sounded like notes she had written down in advance. "I'd like to report a suspicious person. He's walking on Copperstone Lane. Black male, gray sweatshirt. He's been circling the block. He doesn't belong here." "Ma'am, do you know this person?" "I do not." "Has he approached you or made any threats?" "He is walking on the street at 6 in the morning in this neighborhood. I am telling you what I see." "Understood. I'll send a unit." The unit was Officer Blaine Boyce, 6-year Havermill patrolman, currently under quarterly review by his field training supervisor for a pattern of complaints his chief had, per procedure, characterized as unfounded in all previous instances. Boyce had been 3 blocks away, parked behind the Baptist church at the end of Millbank, drinking coffee and running plates on cars parked overnight. He put the coffee in the cup holder. He turned the engine over. He rolled onto Copperstone at 52 miles an hour in a 35 zone, with his lights on, but no siren, and he saw the man in the gray sweatshirt standing at the end of the driveway at number 174, and he made his decision before he braked. Cassian saw the cruiser come around the bend. He was standing at his own mailbox, his own brass numbers over his shoulder, having just come to the end of his run. He was not out of breath. He was pulling his gloves off, thumb over palm, when the cruiser stopped diagonally across the driveway entrance, blocking his own gate. The door opened. The boots came down. "Sir, I need to see your identification." "My identification is inside the house. This is my house. My address is 174 Copperstone Lane, which is stenciled on the mailbox to my left." "You match the description of a suspicious person in this area." "The description of a black man in a gray sweatshirt? I heard the call on your radio." The patrolman's jaw tightened. "You heard nothing." "Officer, the posted sign on my gate reads no trespassing, VA code 18.2-119. I am on my side of that sign. You are on the wrong side of it. I would ask, per procedure, that you step back and allow me to walk up to my front door." "You are not going anywhere until I confirm your identity." "I understand. Then I would ask you to open my mailbox, which is legally accessible to a peace officer on a welfare check, and remove the small manila envelope taped to the inside of the lid. It contains a photocopy of my driver's license. It has been there since April, for exactly this situation." The patrolman did not move. His eyes did not leave Cassian's face. "You had a photocopy of your license taped inside your mailbox." "I did." "Why would a person do that?" "Because I am 51 years old, officer, and I have lived in this country every one of those years." Something passed behind the patrolman's eyes. It was not shame. It was closer to insult. He stepped forward. He did not open the mailbox. "Turn around, hands on the vehicle." "I have not been asked to leave my own property. There is no probable cause for a Terry stop under the standards set in Virginia v. Moore. I would ask you to reconsider." "Per procedure." Cassian's chin lifted very slightly. It was the second time he had used the phrase "per procedure" in the exchange. The first time, the officer had not noticed. The second time, a voice came through the cruiser's open radio. Not the dispatcher, a different voice, older, calmer. "Boyce, this is Arwood. Slow it down. What's your visual?" The patrolman did not answer his own field training officer. He stepped forward instead, and he grabbed Cassian's wrist, and he turned him hard against the mailbox post. Cassian did not resist. He kept his hands open. He kept his voice at the same low, unhurried pitch.
Officer Boyce, your body camera stopped recording 40 seconds ago. Your cruiser's dash cam is angled away from us. You are alone with me on private property with no active recording. Whatever you are about to do next, I would ask you to reconsider that also. The patrolman went very still. How do you know my name? It is on your name tape, second line, block letters, standard issue duty uniform. How do you know my body camera stopped? Because the small green light on your collar stopped blinking 1 minute and 12 seconds ago, and it has not started again. The patrolman looked down at his own collar for the first time in the entire encounter. The light was indeed dark. Boyce's face went a color that was not quite red. He pulled the cuffs from his belt, metal on nylon. If you're watching this and something in it is landing on your chest, hit subscribe. This channel puts out one of these every week. The sergeant's cruiser came around the bend at 6:23 a.m., 17 minutes after Boyce had put Cassian face down on his own gravel. Sergeant Norbert Royd was a compact man with a graying mustache and a leather-bound notebook in his breast pocket that he had carried unchanged for 11 years. He parked behind Boyce's cruiser. He got out slowly. He looked at the mailbox, at the man cuffed against the mailbox post, at the manila envelope taped to the inside of the mailbox lid that Boyce had at some point ripped down and let fall to the gravel without opening. He looked at the envelope for a full 3 seconds. Then he looked at Boyce. Walk me through what we've got here. Suspicious person call. Subject matches. Refused to comply. Resisted. Resisted how? Verbally. The sergeant's mustache moved in a way that was not quite a smile. He turned to Cassian. Sir, do you live at this address? I do. Do you have identification on your person? I do not. My identification is in the manila envelope next to the mailbox post where Officer Boyce placed it. The sergeant crouched. He picked up the envelope. He opened it. He looked at the photocopy inside. He looked at Cassian. He looked at Boyce. Whatever he saw on the photocopy, he did not say aloud. He slid it back into the envelope. He held the envelope in one hand at his side, and with the other, he keyed his shoulder mic. 12. Copy. Go ahead, 12. Confirm the recording status on Unit 31's body cam and dash cam for the last 20 minutes. There was a pause on the other end. The pause was longer than a pause should have been. 12. Unit 31's body cam went inactive at 0603. Dash cam is active, but the vehicle is parked at an angle that puts the subject outside a frame. Copy that. The sergeant put his mic down. He did not look at Boyce. He looked at Cassian. Sir, I am going to move you off the gravel and into the back of my cruiser, not Officer Boyce's. My body camera is currently active. You will remain cuffed for our safety, as is standard on any interaction that has progressed to this point, but you are not at this moment under formal arrest. Do you understand the distinction I am making? I do, Sergeant. I would like to ask you, per procedure, whether you have any medical conditions or, I do not, any items on your person I should be aware of. I have a phone in my hip pocket. It has been ringing for the last 22 minutes. The sergeant blinked. It has? It has. Royd looked at Boyce, whose face had gone from red adjacent to a flat kind of pale. Boyce, Sergeant, get in your vehicle. Follow me back to the station. Do not speak on the radio. Do not touch your body camera. Do not touch your dash cam. Do you understand me? Sergeant, this individual was... Do you understand me? Yes, Sergeant. Cassian was helped gently into the back of the sergeant's cruiser. The door closed. The phone in his hip pocket buzzed one final long buzz and then went silent. He sat with his hands cuffed behind his back on the cracked vinyl seat, and he watched through the front windshield as Sergeant Royd stood very still at the end of the driveway with the manila envelope in his hand, looking at the mailbox with the small brass numbers on it, and he watched him take a slow, deliberate breath before he got into the driver's seat. Neither man spoke on the drive to the station.
The Havermill Police Department occupied a low brick building at the corner of Main and Verland, across the parking lot from the volunteer fire company. 19 sworn officers, a civilian records clerk, a holding area with 2 cells and an intake desk that faced a bulletproof glass window. It was the kind of station where everyone knew everyone, and where the coffee pot in the break room had been brewing the same brand of coffee since 2009, and where the walls in the hallway leading to the chief's office were lined with framed photographs of every officer who had ever served, going back to the founding of the department in 1947. There was one black officer in the framed photographs. He had served for 2 years in the mid-90s, and he had left, per department records, for personal reasons. Cassian was walked through the back door at 6:41 a.m. He was booked at the intake desk by a clerk named Ivy, who did not meet his eyes. He was searched. His phone, his house key, his wallet. His wallet had been in a small zippered compartment inside the waistband of his sweatpants, and Boyce had not found it during his search on the driveway, and Cassian had not mentioned it. Were placed in a plastic bin. His property receipt was filled out by a young officer with sandy hair and a crooked collar whose name tape read A.R. Wood. Fletcher R. Wood was Boyce's field training officer for the quarter. He was also, per the shift roster taped to the wall behind the intake desk, the officer who had spoken to Boyce on the radio during the stop. He did not speak to Cassian now. He filled out the property receipt, and he handed a copy to Cassian, and he took the plastic bin down the hall to the property room, and Cassian noted, without commenting, that R. Wood had not signed the receipt in the space provided. He was placed in holding cell number 1. He sat on the metal bench. He put his hands on his knees. He waited. He had asked at intake for a phone call. The clerk had told him, without looking up, that phone calls were permitted after processing was complete, and that processing was not complete. He had asked per VA Code Section 19.243 for the arresting officer to formally state the charge. He had been told the charge was pending. The green light on Sergeant Royd's body camera went dark somewhere between the intake desk and the property room. At 7:11 a.m., Boyce walked past the cell. He stopped. He looked in through the bars. He smiled. It was a small, tight smile, the kind of man wears when he has convinced himself that whatever is about to happen has already been decided in his favor. You are going to be here a while. Cassian did not answer. He looked at the floor. He counted the tiles between the bench and the bars. He counted them a second time. When he looked up, Boyce was gone. At 7:29 a.m., Boyce came back with a plastic cup of water. He did not offer it. He set it on the floor outside the cell, 3 inches beyond the bars, where it could be seen but not reached. He walked away. At 7:46 a.m., Sergeant Royd walked past the cell. He stopped. He looked at the water cup on the floor. He picked it up. He unlocked the cell door. He walked in. He handed the cup to Cassian. "Sir." "Thank you, Sergeant." Royd stood in the cell for a moment longer than he needed to. He looked at Cassian the way a man looks at a puzzle he has begun to suspect he is holding upside down. "Sir, I am going to ask you a question, and I would like you to answer it honestly." "I will." Is there anyone I should be calling on your behalf? A family member, an attorney, anyone?" Cassian looked up at him. He held the sergeant's gaze for a long, quiet second. "Sir, my phone has been ringing since 6:03 a.m. Whoever is calling will find me. I would ask, per procedure, that you check the property receipt Officer R. Wood filled out against the MDT log entry for the time I was booked. The numbers are not going to match." Royd's mouth opened. It closed. "Why do you say that?" "Because I have been counting the minutes since I was placed in this cell, and the intake stamp on the receipt Officer R. Wood handed me reads 6:38 a.m., and I was walked through the door at 6:41 a.m. Royd stared at him. "Sir, who are you?" Cassian took a slow drink of the water. He set the cup down on the bench beside him. He did not answer the question. Out in the parking lot, at that exact moment, a black government SUV rolled through the entrance and stopped in the visitor space nearest the front door. A second SUV followed it. A third came around the corner from Main Street. On the intake desk, in the plastic property bin that Fletcher Arwood had signed the wrong way, the phone belonging to the man in cell number 1 lit up one more time, and this time the caller ID on the screen, visible through the clear plastic of the bin to anyone who happened to walk past the desk, read 3 letters and a hyphen and 3 more letters. WFOCOS. Ivy, the clerk, looked at it. She looked away. She looked back. She picked up the desk phone. She dialed the chief's extension. It rang 4 times before Chief Kingsley picked up, and when he picked up, his voice was thick with the rest of his morning sleep, and Ivy's voice when she spoke was so quiet the chief had to repeat herself twice. "Chief, I think we have a problem. If you have made it this far and want to know what happens when those 3 SUVs step out of their vehicles, hit like and subscribe now. Part 2 drops next."
Chief Kingsley Foster arrived at the station at 8:02 a.m. in the same brown suit he had worn to the Rotary breakfast the morning before. He had not shaved. He had not eaten. He had been chief of the Havermill Police Department for 6 years, and he had, in those 6 years, learned to trust the pitch of Ivy's voice on the phone. And the pitch of Ivy's voice that morning had put a coldness in the small of his back that his coffee had not fixed. He walked in through the side door. He did not stop at the intake desk. He walked directly to his own office, closed the door, sat down behind his desk, and opened his laptop. He did not open the case file. He opened his email. The email he had sent at 5:29 a.m., 34 minutes before Boyce had rolled onto Copperstone Lane, was still in his outbox, marked Sent. It was addressed to the Town Council Liaison. Subject line, Sat Morning Shift Brief. The body of the email read in one paragraph that his department had, quote, cleared a suspicious persons call on Copperstone with a textbook stop this morning, and that he was, quote, proud of the quality of policing on display in the pre-dawn hours. He had drafted the email the night before. He had scheduled it to send. He had not, at the moment of drafting, known which call it would be describing. He had known, from 6 years of pattern, that there would be one. He stared at the screen. He tried, twice, to delete the email from the recipient's inbox. He could not. It had been read at 6:08 a.m. Out in the intake area, the front door opened. The man who walked in was tall, in his early 40s, dressed in a charcoal suit with no tie. He carried a slim, sealed manila envelope tucked under his left arm. He did not identify himself at the desk. He waited, patiently, at the bulletproof glass until Ivy looked up. "I am here for the individual you booked this morning at 6:41 a.m. I would like to speak with the officer in charge." "Sir, are you an attorney?" "I am not. My name is Silas Forrester. I am the Chief of Staff for the Washington Field Office. I would like to speak with the officer in charge, and I would like to do so within the next 4 minutes." Ivy's hand went to the desk phone. She did not dial the chief. She dialed Sergeant Royd's extension. Royd was in the property room, standing at the shelf where Fletcher Arwood had placed the plastic bin belonging to the man in cell 1. He was holding the property receipt in his left hand and the MDT printout in his right, and he was staring at the timestamps on both, and the timestamps, as the man in cell 1 had predicted, did not match. The receipt read 6:38 a.m. The MDT log read 6:44 a.m. The gap was 6 minutes, and in those 6 minutes, per the property room camera, no one had entered or exited, and the plastic bin had, per the camera, sat on the counter with the phone inside it face up. The phone had received 4 calls in that window. Royd's radio crackled, Ivy's voice quieter than usual. "Sergeant, front desk, now." He walked out. He saw the man in the charcoal suit. He saw the manila envelope under the man's arm.
He understood, in the way a career sergeant understands things without being told, that his morning was no longer his own. "Sir, I am Sergeant Royd. Sir, I would like to be walked to your holding area. I would like to be present when the individual you are holding is brought out. I would like the chief present as well, and I would like, per federal preservation obligations that I will articulate in one moment, every recording device in this building to be, as of right now, running." Royd looked at him for a long second. Then he keyed his shoulder mic. "All units in the building, activate body-worn cameras. All units, confirm." Confirmations came back one by one. Boyce's did not come back for 11 seconds. When it did, his voice was thin. 31. Active. Silas Forrester set the sealed manila envelope on the intake counter. He did not open it yet. He waited. Chief Foster came out of his office at 8:14 a.m. He had put on his tie. His tie was crooked. He walked up to the intake counter with his hand extended and a small professional smile that did not reach the corners of his mouth.
"I'm Chief Foster. I understand there's been—" "Chief, I would like the individual in your holding area brought out. Now, please." The smile stayed on the chief's face. It did not move. Royd went down the hall. The cell door opened at 8:16 a.m. Cassian Alder stood up from the metal bench. His wrists had a red band around each of them from the cuffs. He walked out of the cell on his own. Royd did not touch him. Royd walked half a step behind him, and when they came around the corner into the intake area, and Cassian saw Silas Forrester standing at the counter, Cassian nodded once, and Silas nodded back, and neither man said each other's name. Silas turned the sealed manila envelope over. He broke the seal. He removed the contents one item at a time, and he read each item aloud, on the record, for every body camera in the room. Item 1, FBI Credential Folio, Gold Shield, Credential Number 629144, issued to Cassian A. Alder, Position Designation Assistant Director in Charge, Washington Field Office. Item 2, Service Weapon Receipt, Standard Issue Glock 19, Serial Number logged with Bureau Armory on January 12, 2024. Item 3, Commission Document, signed by the Director of the Federal Bureau of Investigation and countersigned by the Deputy Attorney General, appointing Cassian A. Alder to the position of Assistant Director in Charge, Washington Field Office, sworn January 15, 2024. He paused. He looked at Chief Foster. Item 4, Chain of Custody Log for the property Officer Fletcher signed into evidence at your intake desk this morning at, per your MDT, 6:44 a.m., a time which postdates the printed property receipt in the subject's possession by 6 minutes. That gap will be part of the federal preservation letter that United States Attorney Audrey Oswald is currently signing at her office in Alexandria, and which I expect to be walked through this front door within the next 25 minutes. Chief Foster's mouth was open. It stayed open. Cassian, standing at Silas's shoulder, spoke for the first time since he had left the cell. His voice was the same low, unhurried pitch it had been on the driveway. "Sergeant Royd, sir. When the preservation letter arrives, please walk U.S. Attorney Oswald personally to the property room and to the evidence server room. Do not permit any device to be powered down, wiped, or handled by any officer whose name appears in the incident report from this morning. That includes Officer Boyce, Officer Arwood, Officer Lark, and any officer who has entered the property room between 6:03 a.m. and this moment. You will find that list on the door swipe log, which I would ask you to also preserve." "Yes, sir." "Thank you." The chief's mouth closed. He tried to speak. He tried a second time. "Director Alder, Assistant Director, I want to be absolutely clear that this department had no—" "Chief Foster."
Yes. I do not want a statement from you at this moment. I want you to sit down in your office and wait for United States Attorney Oswald. I want you to say nothing to any officer in this building about this morning's stop. I want you to preserve in place the email you sent at 5:29 a.m. to your town council liaison. Are we clear? The chief's face went the color of the wall behind him. He nodded. We are. If this is landing, tap subscribe. The last third is where the receipts open all the way up.
U.S. Attorney Audrey Oswald walked through the front door of the Havermill Police Department at 8:41 a.m. She was 58, sharp-featured, dressed in a Navy suit that had been worn to 400 federal court appearances and held up in every one of them. She carried a leather portfolio in her right hand and a signed federal preservation letter in her left. She did not smile at the intake desk. She did not need to. The preservation letter demanded, under threat of federal contempt, the immediate and unaltered preservation of every body-worn camera file, dash cam file, MDT log, dispatch recording, door swipe log, evidence server entry, and internal email pertaining to the events of that morning between 5:45 a.m. and the present moment. It was signed by Audrey Oswald on behalf of the Eastern District of Virginia. It was countersigned in an attached memorandum by a Deputy Assistant Attorney General for Civil Rights. The chief signed the acknowledgement page. His hand shook once at the middle of the signature. Oswald did not comment. She walked with Sergeant Roy to the property room, and then to the evidence server room, and then to the dispatch console, and she preserved, per the letter, every file that had been generated since 5:45 a.m., and she made copies of every file to a bureau-issued external drive that Silas Forrester handed her in a sealed evidence bag. The intake camera in the ceiling of the front room caught the entire process. It also caught, at 9:07 a.m., a small, quiet moment that no one commented on at the time, but that would appear later in the federal filings. The moment when Officer Blaine Boyce walked past the intake desk, saw Cassian Alder standing in a plain gray sweatshirt beside the chief of staff of the Washington field office, and stopped walking mid-stride. His face on the recording went slack. His hand went to the wall to steady himself. He did not speak. He turned around. He walked back the way he had come. The dashcam file from Boyce's cruiser was pulled at 9:19 a.m. It had a 10-minute gap between 6:04 a.m. and 6:14 a.m. The system log showed the camera had been manually paused from within the vehicle at 6:03 a.m. and manually restarted at 6:14 a.m. There was, in the vehicle, only one person during that window. The body-worn camera file from Boyce's uniform had a similar gap, same window, same manual pause. The 911 audio was pulled. Camelia Frazier's voice was, per the recording, unmistakable, and per the recording, she read her call from what sounded like written notes. The dispatcher script, per the recording, had not asked her the follow-up questions that Havermill PD's own General Order 6.4 required for a suspicious persons call, questions about behavior, weapons, prior contact, and the dispatcher had, per the recording, sent the unit anyway. Ezra Aaron's phone rang at 9:31 a.m. He was a reporter with the Piedmont Ledger, 44 years old, 12 years covering Fauquier County government, and the caller was a source inside the town clerk's office who had, per an arrangement of long standing, called him whenever a preservation letter from a U.S. attorney was walked into a municipal building in the county. He had not, before that morning, received such a call. He wrote down what the source told him. He drove to Havermill. He arrived at 10:04 a.m. He waited in the parking lot. Inside, at 10:11 a.m., Sergeant Royd formally released Cassian Alder from custody. No charges were filed. The property receipt was corrected. The manila envelope from Cassian's mailbox was returned to him, unopened since Royd had picked it up off the gravel. Cassian signed the release form with a steady hand. He walked out through the front door of the station, past Ezra Aaron in the parking lot,
and got into the passenger seat of the second black SUV. Ezra did not approach him. He watched the SUV pull away, and he wrote down its plate number, and he went inside the station and asked, per the Virginia Freedom of Information Act, for a copy of the incident report and the dispatch log and the property receipt for the individual booked at 6:41 a.m. that morning. He was told, per procedure, that the request would be processed within 5 business days. He nodded. He walked out. He was already writing the story in his head.
The justice cascade unfolded over the 6 weeks that followed, and it did not unfold cleanly, because such things never do. Tier 1 arrived at 11:14 a.m. the same morning. Officer Blaine Boyce was placed on paid administrative leave pending internal affairs. He surrendered his weapon and his badge at the front desk. He did not speak on the way out. His union representative met him in the parking lot. Tier 2 came the following Monday. Officer Fletcher Arwood was placed on desk duty, and the Havermill mobile data terminal audit was formally opened by an outside consultant contracted by the town council under emergency session. An audit that would, 3 weeks later, surface a pattern of timestamp irregularities on suspicious person stops going back 4 years. Tier 3 came 10 days after that. Sergeant Norbert Royd, who had done, per every review, exactly what a sergeant was supposed to do the moment he arrived on Copperstone Lane, was nonetheless reassigned to the Records Division pending review, because he had been the on-duty supervisor and because his signature was on the release form. He accepted the reassignment without comment. On his last day in the Patrol Division, he wrote a 2-page memorandum to the chief describing, per procedure, every inconsistency he had personally observed in the arrest report Boyce had filed. The memorandum was preserved. Tier 4 was the chief. Chief Kingsley Foster kept his job. The town council, meeting in closed session, ordered an external management audit of the department to be conducted by a retired Virginia State Police colonel of the council's choosing, and Foster was directed to cooperate fully. The audit was projected to take between 9 and 14 months. Foster was, per the council's public statement, retained pending outcomes. Tier 5 arrived from Richmond. The Virginia State Police, referred by the U.S. Attorney's Office, opened a criminal review of Officer Boyce's conduct under VA Code 18.2.479.1, obstruction of justice, and 19.2.59, unlawful search. The review was expected, per the referring memorandum, to take between 4 and 8 months, and any charging decision, per Virginia procedure, would be made by the Commonwealth's attorney of an adjoining county to avoid the appearance of conflict. Tier 6 was the one that made the front page of the Piedmont Ledger on the Sunday of the second week. The DOJ Civil Rights Division, under 34 U.S.C. Section 126001, opened a preliminary pattern or practice inquiry into the Havermill Police Department. The scope, per the letter, covered 5 years of stop data, complaint records, use of force files, and the department's compliance with body-worn camera integrity requirements under VA Code 50.30.2. The inquiry, per the letter, was preliminary and could, per the letter, take between 18 and 3 years to reach findings. It was, per the letter, not to be characterized as a determination of misconduct at the department level. The word preliminary did a lot of work in that letter. A civil action under 42 U.S.C. Section 1983, filed on Cassian's behalf by outside counsel to whom the U.S. Attorney's Office had made a referral, was accepted for docketing in the Eastern District of Virginia on a Tuesday. Discovery was projected to run 12 to 18 months. Any settlement, per counsel's opening filing, would require an admission of departmental failures, not merely individual officer discipline, and would require the seating of an independent federal monitor for a period of not less than 18 months. The town's insurer, per public reporting, retained defense counsel from Richmond.
Camelia Fraser, at some point on the Monday morning after the arrest, deleted her phone video of the stop from the Copperstone neighborhood group chat. She did not delete it from her phone. Ezra Aaron had, per his source in the group chat, already saved a copy. She stopped walking her small white dog past the front of number 174. She began driving to a park 2 miles away instead. She did not, per anyone who asked, comment publicly on the events of that morning. Her attorney, retained on the Tuesday, issued a 2-sentence statement that said only that she had made a good faith report and had no further comment.
6 weeks after the arrest, on a clear, cold Wednesday morning in mid-October, Cassian Alder was back at his desk on the 9th floor of the Washington Field Office Building. His inbox was, per the ordinary rhythm of his position, 314 unread emails deep. His calendar had a briefing with the deputy director at 10 a.m. and a joint task force meeting at 2 p.m. His coffee was still hot. He did not think about Havermill more than 3 or 4 times that morning. It was, he had decided, somewhere between the 2nd and 3rd week, not something he was going to give any more of his mornings to than the mornings it had already taken. He ran his 3-mile loop on Copperstone Lane the next Saturday at 6 a.m. He wore the same gray sweatshirt. He folded his gloves the same way when he got home. Mr. Halstead, the retired postal carrier at number 162, waved from his porch with a coffee in his hand, and Cassian waved back, and Mr. Halstead said, in the same voice he had always used, "Good morning, Cassian," and Cassian said in the same voice, "Good morning, Mr. Halstead." Halfway back up the block, Cassian slowed at Camelia Fraser's driveway. Camelia's car was not there. In the front yard, on a metal post driven into the frozen lawn, a real estate sign had been planted the day before. Above the agent's name and photo was a sticker that read in bright red block letters, "Sold." The sale, per public records that Ezra Aaron would pull the following Monday, had closed in cash. The buyer was an LLC. The LLC was registered to a post office box in Richmond, and the registered agent of the LLC was a Delaware entity whose ownership was, per the filings, not further disclosed. Ezra spent an afternoon on it. He did not, by the time he filed his weekly column, get to the bottom of who owned it. He noted in a single sentence at the end of the column that he was continuing to look. At the DOJ, the preliminary letter that had opened the Havermill inquiry, on the copy that reached Ezra through a source, had 3 names redacted in the middle of the 3rd paragraph. The redactions were the black bar kind. Ezra counted the character widths under the bars. He counted them twice. He believed, based on the widths, that the 3 names were county-level officials, not municipal, not federal, but county. He did not print this. He kept the count in his notebook. The dash cam file from Boyce's cruiser, the file with the 10-minute gap between 6:04 a.m. and 6:14 a.m., remained, per the Internal Affairs disclosure log that Oswalt's office had preserved, unexplained on the record. Boyce, per his attorney, had declined to be interviewed about the gap. The Internal Affairs report, when it was released in redacted form in late November, listed the gap in a table of findings requiring further review. Further review was not scheduled. Cassian finished his run. He came up the driveway at number 174. He picked up his newspaper from the gravel. He glanced, once, at the mailbox with the small brass numbers on it and the manila envelope taped, again, to the inside of the lid. He had put a new one there the same afternoon he had come home from the station. He opened the front door. He went inside. He folded his gloves, thumb over palm, fingers over thumb, a small, tight square, and he put them in the drawer of the hall table where his hands had put them unchanged for 29 years. Outside, on Copperstone Lane, the sun climbed over the hayfield behind the house. A truck came around the bend. It did not slow down. It kept going.
Somewhere in Richmond, in a post office box that received mail for an LLC that owned a colonial across the street from an FBI assistant director, an envelope sat unopened on top of a small stack of other envelopes. It had been there for 3 days. No one had come to collect it yet.